On a bright morning, Nathaniel Brooks was driving into a new city. He felt excitement bubbling inside him because today was special. He was about to become the chief of police. Nathaniel was known as a good cop, honest and fair. He had spent years earning respect in law enforcement. Now he was ready to help a police department that needed strong leadership. As he drove, Nathaniel thought about the challenges ahead. He thought about the people he would meet and the changes he wanted to make. The city was counting on him to bring a new vision. Suddenly, flashing lights appeared in his rearview mirror. His heart skipped a beat. He was being pulled over. Nathaniel took a deep breath and calmly parked his SUV. His heart rate stayed steady. He had been stopped by police before. He knew what to do, hands on the steering wheel and polite answers. But today felt different. Something was in the air. Officer Greg Miller stepped out of his patrol car. He was a white cop in his late 30s with a serious attitude. Greg was known for being tough and no-nonsense. As he approached Nathaniel's SUV, his eyes narrowed. He saw Nathaniel, a black man, and made quick, unfair judgments. "License and registration! Now!" Greg barked. His voice was harsh, leaving no room for negotiation. Nathaniel reached for his documents slowly. He remembered that sudden movements could cause trouble. He handed over his license and registration, keeping eye contact. Nathaniel's expression was calm, like a man who knew how to handle tough situations. Greg snatched the documents from Nathaniel's hand. He barely glanced at him as he scanned the license. The name seemed familiar, but Greg couldn't place it. In his mind, Nathaniel was just another outsider passing through. "What are you doing in this part of town?" Greg demanded. Nathaniel replied evenly, "Just passing through." Greg wasn't satisfied. He leaned closer to the window. "What do you mean passing through? Where are you headed?" "Into the city," Nathaniel answered politely. Greg's mind raced, searching for any reason to feel suspicious. He looked Nathaniel up and down, searching for signs that he didn't belong. "What's your business in the city?" Greg asked, his tone sharper. Nathaniel paused, weighing his options. He could reveal his identity and end this uncomfortable encounter. But he decided to wait and see what would happen next. "I work in law enforcement," he said finally, his voice steady. Greg raised an eyebrow, skeptical of Nathaniel's claim. "Law enforcement? You don't look like any cop I know," he sneered. Nathaniel didn't react to the insult. He had faced far worse in his time. Instead, he maintained his calm demeanor. Greg, however, was growing more agitated by the second. He flipped through Nathaniel's documents again, searching for something. The name nagged at him. Why did it feel familiar? Unable to shake the feeling, Greg asked abruptly, "What's your father's name?" Nathaniel smiled slightly at the question. He knew where this was going, but he answered with confidence. "My father's name doesn't matter. What about yours, officer? What's your father's name?" Greg hesitated for a moment, then said, "Richard. Richard Miller." Nathaniel's eyes softened slightly at the name. "Richard Miller. Your father became a cop after a tough time in his life, didn't he?" Greg's confusion deepened. "How do you know that?" he asked. Nathaniel's voice remained calm, but he spoke with a deeper connection. "I knew your father. I was there for him when he needed help. I supported him when others turned their backs. I'm the reason he got a second chance and became a cop." Greg's breath caught in his throat. His father had often spoken about a man who had helped him during tough times. You're the man my dad always talked about?" Greg asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The one who helped him?" Nathaniel nodded, his expression calm but understanding. "Yes, Greg. I'm that man, and I'm also the new chief of police for this city." The truth hit Greg like a ton of bricks. The man he had treated with suspicion was not only his father's savior, but also his new boss. Guilt washed over him, leaving him speechless. I didn't know," Greg stammered. "Chief, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Nathaniel looked at him, his expression softening. "Greg, this isn't just about me. It's about how you treat people. You didn't know who I was. but that shouldn't matter. You judged me because of the color of my skin, because of your own biases. That's not what being a cop is about. Greg's head dropped, shame flooding his senses. I know, he whispered. I was wrong. Nathaniel nodded, acknowledging the admission. It's never too late to change, Greg. But it starts with recognizing that everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are. There was a long, heavy silence between them. Finally, Greg looked up, sincerity in his eyes. Chief, would you come with me to see my dad? I think he'd want to see you, and I need to make things right. Nathaniel studied Greg for a moment, weighing the sincerity of his request. Then, with a nod, he agreed. All right, Greg, let's go. They drove in silence, the weight of the morning's events hanging in the air. As they approached a modest suburban home, Greg's heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't seen his father in weeks. Now he was about to bring the man who had saved his father's life back into his world. The thought filled him with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. When they arrived, Greg hesitated before stepping out of the car. Nathaniel noticed his unease but said nothing. This was a moment Greg had to face on his own. Finally, Greg summoned the courage to walk up to the door and knock. The door opened to reveal an older man in his 60s, Richard Miller. His face lit up with surprise as he saw his son standing there with Nathaniel beside him. Nathaniel, is that really you? Richard asked, his voice thick with emotion. Nathaniel smiled warmly. It's good to see you, Richard. It's been a long time. Richard stepped forward and embraced Nathaniel, tears brimming in his eyes. You saved my life, Nathaniel. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. Nathaniel returned the embrace, his voice gentle but firm. You did the hard work, Richard. I just gave you a push when you needed it. As they stepped inside, the tension melted away. Warmth replaced the uncertainty, and they felt the connection grow. Richard looked at Nathaniel with gratitude in his eyes. I can't believe you're the chief now. It means so much that you came back to see me. Nathaniel chuckled softly. Well, it's part of the job, but it's also personal. Greg stood back, watching his father and Nathaniel. He felt a mix of pride and shame. He had treated Nathaniel with suspicion, and now he saw how wrong he had been. Richard turned to Greg and noticed his expression. What's wrong, son? You look troubled. I messed up, Dad, Greg said quietly. I didn't treat the chief with respect. I judged him without knowing who he was. Richard's expression shifted to concern. Greg, it's never too late to learn. What matters is what you do next. Nathaniel nodded in agreement. Your father is right, Greg. We all make mistakes. It's how we learn and grow that counts. Greg took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. I want to do better, Chief. I really do. Nathaniel smiled, encouraging Greg. It starts with listening and understanding. People have stories, and it's our job to learn them. Greg felt grateful for Nathaniel's words. He had been given a chance to change. Richard watched the interaction, feeling a sense of pride in both men. He had seen Nathaniel's heart and courage, and he knew he had raised a good son. Let's have some coffee and talk, Richard suggested. Nathaniel agreed. I'd like that. They settled at the kitchen table, the atmosphere warm and inviting. Greg poured coffee for everyone, feeling nervous but hopeful. So, what have you been up to, Nathaniel? Richard asked, his eyes sparkling. Nathaniel took a sip and smiled. Just trying to make a difference. Greg listened closely, eager to learn more about the man his father admired. I want to create a police department that reflects the community we serve. We need to build trust and understanding. Richard nodded. That's so important. Trust is everything in law enforcement. Greg felt a sense of purpose awaken within him. He wanted to be a part of that change. Chief, I want to help, he said earnestly. Nathaniel looked at Greg, pride evident in his eyes. That's the spirit, Greg. It starts with you. The conversation flowed easily and the connection deepened. They shared stories of the past, laughter filling the room. Nathaniel spoke about the challenges he had faced in his career. Richard shared stories of his early days on the force. Greg listened, absorbing every word, his heart growing lighter. Eventually, Richard turned serious. Greg, I want you to remember something. Always be humble. It's easy to lose sight of what matters when you wear the badge. Greg nodded, absorbing his father's wisdom. Thanks, Dad. I won't forget. As the afternoon faded into evening, the conversation turned to dreams. What's your vision for the police department? Richard asked. Nathaniel leaned forward, excitement in his eyes. I want to implement community programs that engage and educate. I want everyone to feel safe and heard. Greg felt a spark of inspiration. Could I help organize community events? He asked eagerly. Nathaniel smiled. Absolutely, it's a team effort. Richard beamed with pride, seeing his son take initiative. You're going to do great things, Greg. I believe in you. As the day turned into night, the three men sat together, a new bond forming. They shared dreams, regrets, and hopes for the future. Nathaniel felt a sense of fulfillment. This was why he had become a cop, to change lives and build connections. He looked at Greg and Richard, grateful for the journey they had shared. Thank you for welcoming me into your home, Nathaniel said sincerely. Richard shook his head. Thank you for being a friend to our family. Greg felt a warmth spread through him. I'm grateful for this chance to learn and grow. Nathaniel nodded, knowing that this was just the beginning. Their lives were forever changed by this encounter. It was a lesson in humility, respect, and understanding. As they stood together, Nathaniel felt hopeful for the future. With every challenge ahead, they would face it together. And in that moment, the road to change had just begun.